Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to the powdered, perfumed, and peculiarly flower-coated corridors of Versailles, where fashion meant balancing a loaf-sized wig on your scalp and pretending it was normal. Imagine waking up to birdsong outside your velvet-curtained chamber, slipping on your embroidered slippers and heading out to breakfast with a pound of wheat flour dusted delicately over your head. You're already a little groggy, maybe not quite awake yet, but that's perfect. Because this journey isn't meant to energize you. It's meant to lull you softly, gently, through the powdery haze of a world that once existed and probably shouldn't have. You step through gilded halls where nobles swirl past in rustling silks, trailing scents of lavender musk and slightly burnt toast. Yes, toast. Because in this world, status isn't just worn, it's dusted on. And if you forgot to powder your wig this morning, well, you probably won't survive this, not socially anyway. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you only enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in Versailles just before a royal luncheon. The palace is buzzing. Chamberlains hustle about adjusting paintings that don't need adjusting. Ladies in waiting glide across marbled floors like swans in brocade. But what catches your eye, no assaults your eye, are the wigs. They're everywhere, piled high, frosted like wedding cakes, trailing ribbons, flowers, feathers, sometimes even miniature landscapes. There's a woman whose head bears a scale model orchard. Another's wig features a pastoral scene complete with sheep. You stand quietly stunned as a man walks past with an elegant tower of hair shaped like a tiered fountain. The thing is, none of this is ironic. This is high society. These wigs aren't jokes, they're statements. And you, dear listener, are dangerously under-accessorized. You slip into the back of a salon chamber pretending to examine a tapestry, while watching the powdered masses chat about hunting dogs and regional cheeses. No one seems concerned that they're all shedding tiny white dust clouds with each nod. A sneeze here might as well be a snowstorm. You catch snippets of conversation. Madame du Châtillon used cornstarch last week, can you believe it? Wheat only. Anything else is peasant food. Powdering one's wig is part ritual, part competition, and part performance. The taller the wig, the closer to divine favor, or at least to the chandeliers. And if a few birds build a nest in there, well, that just adds ambiance. You edge toward a side mirror to examine one unfortunate courtier whose wig seems to have collapsed slightly on one side like a soufflé gone wrong. He's trying to prop it up with a discreet hand. Another noblewoman sidesteps him with an expression that says tragic. Meanwhile, powdered footprints line the marble like soft little ghosts. Even the footmen wear wigs, albeit less extravagant ones. One of them meets your eye. You both know your head is bare. He nods as if to say, you'll need a poodle-sized hairpiece by sundown. Historians still argue whether these powdered wigs began primarily for style vanity or lice-related reasons. But here at court, that debate feels irrelevant. The wheat flour isn't just cosmetic, it's symbolic. A daily ritual of transforming yourself into something more than human, something courtly, something deeply inconvenient. You watch as a lady dabs at her powdered forehead with a lace kerchief. Another sprays a fine mist of orange blossom water into the air, letting it drift through her flowery cloud. You breathe in. It smells like a bakery opened in a garden. And then you see it, a small door off the main hall ajar. Inside, the real work happens. The powdering room. You slip in. It's chaos, but elegant chaos. Servants wearing aprons the color of ash wield puffers. Giant bellows loaded with fine flour. Nobles perch on stools, eyes closed, faces serene, while white clouds burst over their heads. One servant carefully brushes flour from a gentleman's ear. Another sneezes discreetly into her sleeve. Here, you learn that wigs are maintained like vintage cars. They are brushed, recurled, pinned, aired, and dusted, and then powdered just enough to impress, not so much to sneeze yourself into exile. It's delicate. It's ridiculous. It's glorious. One of the wig powderers turns to you offering a friendly smile and a handful of dried lavender. To keep the scalp calm, she whispers. You nod, take the lavender, and step out of the cloud room, blinking. Back into the palace, where powdered heads continue bobbing gently like boats on a pale sea. You've barely arrived. And already you understand Versailles doesn't run on blood or gold. It runs on flour. Section 2. You're now a little more acclimated to the flory absurdity that is Versailles. You've stopped flinching when a noblewoman passes by with an entire ship sailing majestically atop her head. You're no longer alarmed when someone sneezes and releases a fine cloud of wheat into the air like a dusty fireworks display. In fact, it's beginning to feel almost normal, which is probably a sign you've been here too long. But to truly understand why these flour-dusted wigs became the golden, or rather ghostly white standard of upper-class life, you need to rewind just a bit. Back to a balding king with a problem, specifically Louis XIII. And historians still debate whether Louis truly started the wig trend out of personal vanity or medical necessity. Either way, one thing is clear: his hair was not cooperating. By the age of 23, Louis XIII was experiencing noticeable hair loss, possibly due to a combination of genetics, poor nutrition, stress, and maybe just sheer royal pressure. A bare royal scalp. Mon Dieu, that would never do. So, what did he do? He did what many men would do today if they had unlimited funds and an entire court of artisans. He commissioned fake hair. Luxurious styled and thick enough to smother a musket ball. He wore it publicly, proudly. And because fashion in court follows the top-down principle quite literally, the rest of the aristocracy followed suit. At first, wigs were practical. They covered baldness, yes, but also protected from lice and other scalp-related indignities. You'd wear your real hair short or even shaved, and then don a wig that was easier to clean, style, and if necessary, burn. But as these things tend to go, practicality gave way to performance. The wigs got bigger, the curls got tighter, the height became a status symbol. And suddenly you couldn't show your face at court without at least a few layers of hair between you and the ceiling. You walk through the Hall of Mirrors now, past portraits of grim-faced nobles with impressive towers of powdered elegance on their heads. Their expressions say divine authority, but their hairstyles say held together by prayer and 2 hidden coat hangers. The wig was not just a cosmetic device, it was a political one. To appear before the king without a proper wig was a grave offense. To wear one slightly askew was a social misstep that could doom your hopes of marriage promotion or invitation to the next opera box soiree. Even the clergy got involved. You recall passing a bishop earlier, whose powdered locks were modest, but still there, because even divine service didn't excuse you from the fashion commandments of Versailles. One mainstream historical fact that rarely gets mentioned in textbooks: the wig industry exploded. Like, really exploded. By the late 1600s, wig makers were some of the most in-demand artisans in France. An entire economy sprang up around hair. Real human hair, horsehair, yak hair. Even imported goat hair from Italy, because nothing said luxury like Mediterranean livestock follicles. You duck into a narrow alley behind the palace kitchens and find yourself in front of a modest-looking workshop. Inside, it's buzzing with activity. Apprentices are boiling hair, brushing it out, curling it around tiny wooden rods, and sewing it into lace frames. There's pomade simmering in a pot, thick and fragrant with lard and apple blossom. The master wig maker doesn't look up. He's busy creating what appears to be a very tiny wig for a lapdog. You blink. He shrugs. For appearances. What's fascinating is that wigs weren't just made. They were sculpted, padded, built from the skull outwards like architectural marvels. Some contained cages to hold the shape, or extra padding to keep them high and bouncy. And yes, some had hidden compartments, love notes, jewelry. One legend claims a noble once smuggled a canary inside her wig for entertainment. Historians still argue whether that one's real or just a particularly fanciful court rumor. But the bigger mystery: why flour? Wheat flour, to be exact. There were other options, of course: chalk rice powder, crushed starch, but wheat flour gave the most even, velvety finish. It clung beautifully to the pomade, slathered wigs, creating that signature soft white halo that shouted, "I am rich, idle, and very itchy." And as a bonus, it masked smells. Because underneath that powdered wig was often days or weeks of, let's just call it, natural scalp ambiance. The combination of flour and scented oils helped disguise that fact. Some nobles even added hints of violet or clove to their powder, because if your head was going to be a loaf, at least make it artisanal. As you leave the wigmaker's alley and step back into the light of the gardens, you pause. There's a nobleman arguing with his valet about whether his wig is elevated enough for the duchess's supper. You notice the valet holding a feather duster and a fine mesh sieve filled with flour. Yes, powdered elegance is a process. A ritual. A theatrical costume layered on top of a deeply fragile ecosystem. And in this world where every glance can judge and every eyebrow can exile, that little layer of flour might just be the most important thing you wear. You exhale. A gentle breeze sends a swirl of flour past your face. You're starting to get it now. Section 3. By now you've stopped questioning whether anything about this world makes sense. Of course, nobles wear pastries on their heads. Of course, there's an entire underground hair economy bustling like a Renaissance stock market. And of course, there are artisans who specialize solely in stuffing, lifting, and sculpting synthetic hair into glorious gravity-defying monuments. You're standing in one of these salons now, not the sort with tea and whispered gossip. Though, let's be honest, that's happening too. But the kind where wig makers practice their art, like Renaissance sculptors. There's a man pinning a velvet ribbon into a towering gray-blonde bouffant. There's another using a goose quill to fluff a tight curl. Someone in the back is steaming a wig on a mannequin head like it's a souffle. The walls are lined with rows of mannequin busts, each wearing a unique creation. Some curled tightly, in the à la Fontange style. Some wide like wings, others vertical like twin obelisks. A few look like entire Baroque altars. These aren't wigs, they're architecture. Each one starts with the foundation, literally. Beneath the visible curls and flower lies a hidden frame made from wire whalebone, or even papier-mâché. This frame or poof is designed to give volume, shape, and stability. After all, when you're hoisting a structure the size of a wedding cake, you'll want something more supportive than hope and pomade. That pomade, by the way, is an entire subject unto itself. You watch as a young assistant ladles a shimmering, slightly gray paste into a copper basin. The ingredients are a mystery, but a whispery voice nearby offers you the recipe: bare, fat, scented oils, beeswax, and a touch of lard. Supposedly good for hair and also possibly excellent for baking. The finished paste is slathered generously into the natural or artificial hair, creating that telltale shine and stickiness that holds everything in place and helps the flower cling like morning dew. Quirky historical tidbit. Some wig makers were so renowned that they had wait lists stretching months. Nobles would travel across provinces for a specific artisan's lifted heart style or temple spiral. One even charged extra to incorporate a tiny music box into the base. You imagine a party where someone's wig begins playing La Marseillaise mid-curtsy. Historians still argue whether wig makers had guild protections or were considered too frivolous for regulation. One powdered customer says idly as she stares into a gilded mirror. You nod politely, hoping she doesn't notice the small tuft of hair falling from the back of her wig, probably a goat hair slip. You peek behind a dressing screen and find the real secret of the salon stuffing. Mouse pelts, tufts of wool, pads of horsehair, even scrap cloth. These are the materials used to bulk up the shape of wigs. One scandalous rumor even tells of a duchess who padded her wig with a discarded pair of gloves, still embroidered with her ex-lover's initials. How poetic. Your attention is drawn to a client settling into a chair. She removes her outer cloak and reveals a surprisingly modest hairstyle. The wigmaker clucks his tongue disapprovingly. We'll fix that. Over the next hour, you watch in awe as her head is transformed from mere human into a monument of flower-dusted sophistication. First, the hair is brushed upward. Then the frame is fitted an elaborate metal cage shaped like a conch shell. After that, layers of curls are pinned in careful symmetry, like frosting a very judgmental cake. Finally, two assistants step forward with puffers' bellows stuffed with wheat flour and begin their rhythmic work. The flour settles like snow, coating each curl, softening the lines, giving the entire structure a milky, serene glow. She looks in the mirror, smiles. A noblewoman enters to wait her turn. She glances once approvingly, then sits and begins filing her nails. One of her earrings looks like a sugar spoon. There's a certain hush in the room as the flower flies. Perhaps it's the reverence of ritual, or maybe no one wants to inhale too deeply. The air smells faintly of bread dough and violets. If you weren't fully awake earlier, this might finish the job. You step outside the salon and into the palace corridor, only to find yourself nearly knocked over by a valet carrying a silver tray piled high with hair ornaments, feathers, faux cherries, porcelain butterflies. He doesn't stop. Late for the Marquis's pigeon wig fitting, he mutters. And you think, of course he is. You've learned by now that wigs weren't merely decorations, they were declarations. Political statements, class signals, emotional armor. A way of saying I have time, I have flour. I have someone to scratch my scalp for me while I pretend I'm reading Rousseau. In court, to arrive without your wig properly styled was to risk public shame or worse, gossip. And gossip in Versailles was deadlier than dueling. At least a duel was honest. You reach the grand staircase and watch two gentlemen debating wig width. One insists the proper measurement from ear to ear is no less than 14 inches. The other disagrees. He believes in verticality. You decide not to take sides. You wouldn't survive the fallout. As you pass a group of courtiers bowing to a painting, you realize something important: these wigs are more than hair. They're costumes for a play where no one ever leaves the stage. Section 4. You wander now through a quieter gallery, where oil portraits line the walls like still spectators in the great performance of Versailles. Everywhere you look, yes, every single one, the subjects wear wigs. Not modest ones either. These are flower-dusted mountains of hair, cascading in loops and whirls, styled with such precision they might as well be marble sculptures. You pause before one particular portrait of a lady whose head is adorned with what appears to be a model windmill. You blink. It has moving parts. And then it dawns on you, this whole powdered wig thing. It wasn't just about covering bald spots. It was about spectacle. And nothing enhanced that spectacle quite like the powder itself, wheat flour to be exact. It's strange to think about now. In your time, wheat flour lives on pantry shelves destined for cakes, or maybe if you're ambitious, sourdough. But here, wheat flour is fashion's final flourish. It's the finishing mist, the aristocratic fog, the crown of powdered pride. You step into the powder room, again, not the bathroom, mind you, but the powder room, where the magic happens. The air is thick with flour. Bellows wheeze gently in the hands of experienced valets. Nobles sit on stools, their eyes closed, trusting entirely in the invisible artistry taking place above their ears. The floor beneath your shoes is softly gritty, like walking on a pie crust. Each puff sends a delicate snowfall into the air, which promptly settles into every fold of clothing, every crevice of wood paneling. And let's face it, probably your lungs too. Flour is chosen not just for its appearance, but for its absorbency. It mattifies, lending wigs that soft powdered glow. It mutes, shine masks oils, and surprisingly helps hold scent. Many nobles add dried lavender, rose petals, or even orange peel to their flour mix. One famously eccentric count preferred a custom blend that smelled faintly of cinnamon toast. Historians still argue whether wheat flour was always the go-to or just what stuck best to pomade. A valet mutters as he fluffs a curl with his sleeve. You nod sagely, pretending you're not also choking slightly. There were other powders used too: ground starch, rice flour, even white clay. But wheat was the star. It was abundant. It had the right consistency. And when fluffed into a mist, it created a visual effect that was nothing short of angelic. You didn't just look powdered, you looked heavenly, a walking pastry with a title. Of course, wheat flour came with drawbacks. For one, it attracted insects. Mice were also known to be fond of it. One famously disastrous evening saw a duchess's elaborate powdered wig hosting an unexpected mouse parade halfway through a violin solo. No one mentioned it aloud. They simply avoided eye contact and quietly moved their chairs. Another issue: the powdering process took time, often hours. A noble might rise at dawn just to sit in the powder chair until noon. Some wore powdering robes, loose linen gowns, to protect their elaborate clothing from stray flour. Others sat beneath canvas hoods like reverse tents so as not to contaminate the air for others. And then there were the flour puffer servants, whose entire job was to fill the bellows with powder and puff it evenly across wigs. You watch now as two puffers work in perfect harmony, one at the back, one at the crown, blowing flour from opposite directions to achieve that flawless cloud-like finish. It's almost like choreography, the dance of the wheat mist. One servant quietly hums as she works dusting the temple area of a lady's wig with the care of a baker decorating a wedding cake. You almost expect her to reach for sprinkles next. The irony isn't lost on you while the poor in Paris were struggling to afford bread. The elite here were sprinkling potential loaves onto their heads. You imagine a peasant staring through the iron gates of Versailles, watching the powdered clouds drift out of an open window and muttering something unprintable under their breath. Flour, after all, was food, essential, priceless. And here it was being used for fashion wafted through the air, like perfume landing on silks, gilded chairs, and the occasional candelabra. You turn to leave the powder room and almost bump into a young page holding a tray of powder puffs and silver spoons. He doesn't even blink. Madame's wig requires a touch more volume, he says, like a sommelier recommending a red with your duck confit. In the hallway beyond, a nobleman complains to his barber that the flour has dulled the golden tone of his curls. We must consider rye, he murmurs darkly. His barber frowns. Too rustic, monsieur. It sends the wrong message. Because everything sends a message here. Wheat flour isn't just a cosmetic. It's the symbol of refinement, leisure, wealth. If you have time to sit and be powdered with food, you are not part of the working world. You are floating above it literally and figuratively. By now there's flour on your shoulders, your eyebrows, and quite possibly in your shoes. But you don't mind. You're beginning to enjoy the strange, dreamy absurdity of it all. Besides, you look rather dashing in pastry form. ChatGPT dans section now. At this point, you're starting to feel like a seasoned flour cloud navigator. You've stopped brushing your sleeves every 5 minutes. You've learned to breathe gently in powdered rooms, and you no longer gasp when someone walks past wearing a ship, a garden, or a small replica of the Bastille in their hair. But there's something you haven't quite mastered yet, getting powdered properly yourself. You're summoned early in the morning by a rather stern-looking valet. Your appointment, he says, as though you've been neglecting royal dental care, rather than simply wandering about wigless. He escorts you briskly through the maze of corridors, past yawning footmen, and the smell of buttered rolls, until you arrive at a private salon. Here your education begins. The experience is part beauty treatment, part military operation. First, you're seated in a low, firm-backed chair. A powdered cloth is draped carefully around your shoulders. 2 assistants, one holding a tray of hairpins, the other a basin of pomade, circle you like surgeons. The air smells of lavender, rosemary, and something suspiciously like roasted almonds. One of them begins brushing your natural hair upward. It's gentle at first, then progressively less so, until it feels like your scalp is being coaxed into a higher tax bracket. Your hair is pinned flat, and a thin cotton cap is tied over it. To keep the oils in, someone murmurs, though you're not sure if they mean yours or theirs. Then comes the wig. It's not just plopped on. Oh no, it's introduced, tilted, aligned with your eyebrows, shifted a few centimeters, pulled forward. Then, when it finally pleases the head stylist, a man in breeches with a thin mustache and strong opinions, it's pinned into place. About 6 dozen pins by the feel of it. And then the powdering. You are told to close your eyes. You comply. A warm, sweet scent reaches your nose, flower maybe with a hint of rose. You hear a soft pff, like a sleepy bellows, and then another. You feel the powder settle across your face, your scalp, your shoulders. It's cool and dry, strangely soothing. They keep puffing. You lose track of time. You open one eye, a gentle scolding. Non, still. You close it again. The flower continues. One of the assistants uses a tiny brush to dust your temples, as if edging a delicate cake. Another dabs under your chin with a silk cloth. You think someone murmurs a prayer for symmetry, and then finally it's done. You're gently turned to face a tall mirror, and there you are, a puffed, powdered monument to absurd aristocracy. You look like you've been baked and frosted and placed gently on a porcelain platter. You look ridiculous, you look magnificent, you look somehow completely at home. Très bien, the stylist says with a satisfied nod. But this isn't the end. No, this is just the beginning. There's maintenance. You're handed a soft brush for light touch-ups, a scented sachet to absorb any unpleasantries, and a small bell to summon a valet should your wig begin to drift. Because wigs drift. Oh yes, especially on windy days, or during dramatic sighs, or during extended conversations about Voltaire, which apparently involve a great deal of head tilting. You're led out into the garden to test the hold, a sort of trial run. And wouldn't you know it, your wig starts to list slightly to the left after about 10 minutes. A valet appears, instantly adjusts it, fluffs. It adds a bit more powder and disappears again, like a hair ghost. It's exhausting, and yet it's strangely comforting. There's a rhythm to it, a sense of control. In a world full of uncertainty, your wig is anchored, puffed symmetrical. Even if the politics of court swirl like a storm around you, your hair, well, your pretend hair is calmly sculpted and lightly dusted with food-grade elegance. You overhear someone nearby whisper, "The Countess fainted yesterday, tipped forward and cracked her wig frame. Had to sit sideways all dinner. The horror." Another noble, a baron perhaps, is having his wig repowdered beneath a cherry tree. Two birds land nearby and peck at the flower on his shoulder. He shoos them off with a yawn. Historians still argue whether this whole process was more about hygiene or performance, he mutters. But I think it's boredom. We're all just looking for something to fuss over. You can't help but agree. This entire ceremony, the brushing, pinning, puffing, it's like a lullaby for the ego. A way to make everyone feel special, pampered, important. Even if you're just sitting around in a powdered puff of goat hair and dried herbs. You head back inside your new wig, bobbing gently with each step. And for a moment you forget what your real hair looks like. Section 6. By the time you make it back into the palace's main hall, you're walking a little taller. Partly because of the confidence your freshly powdered wig lends you. And partly because it adds a good 8 inches to your overall height. You're not just entering a room anymore. You're arriving casting shadows on door frames and occasionally grazing low-hanging chandeliers. You're not alone in this. Every noble you pass is participating in a kind of slow-motion contest of altitude. This isn't about beauty, not really. It's about scale. And in this powdered society, bigger isn't just better, it's mandatory. A lady passes by you with a wig so immense, it includes 2 decorative pheasants, a miniature bust of Rousseau, and what appears to be a functioning sundial. You give a subtle nod of respect. She nods back carefully. Any sudden movement could disrupt the gravitational balance of her ensemble. The sheer size of these wigs turns every room into a negotiation. Doorways must be ducked. Chairs must be approached with strategy. Conversations take place at a slight diagonal. And heaven help you if you need to scratch an itch. You slip into the music salon and take a seat, or rather attempt to. The back of your wig presses against the chair's carved wood, pushing your head forward in a way that would make a chiropractor weep. Across from you, a gentleman in a navy brocade coat is attempting the same feat, but his wig includes a tiered garden. It's not going well, but he doesn't complain. No one does. Because here, fashion is endurance. It's a sacrifice. It's looking like a pastry sculpture while acting like you barely notice. Historians still argue whether the towering wig trend was started by accident or ambition, whispers a courtier beside you. Some claim it began when one duchess needed to hide a love letter in her hair. Another insists it was just to be seen across the ballroom. Whatever the origin, the height of your wig says everything. It tells people how much you're worth. How long did you have to sit still this morning? How many servants can you summon with a bell ring? And how many floors of the palace are you willing to navigate sideways? And the symbolism runs deeper. High hair means high birth, high ambition, and perhaps most importantly, distance. Distance from the peasants, from the merchants, from the wigless, flowerless masses. You're not just elevating your appearance. You're lifting your entire persona above the noise. But all that height requires support. Hidden within your towering confection of curls are wire cages, silk-wrapped pillows, and a central spine made from whalebone or fine wood. It's like wearing a cathedral. You pass a mirror and catch a glimpse of your profile. It's impressive, regal, a bit ridiculous, but strangely empowering. You're beginning to understand the appeal, even if your neck muscles are already starting to protest. In the corridor ahead, you see a servant scurrying after a woman whose wig is starting to tilt noticeably to the right. Another noble's hairpiece appears to be shedding flower, like a winter tree losing leaves. The effect is poetic and slightly alarming. One peculiar but true detail, wigs, became so tall during the peak of this trend that they had to be dressed while lying down. That's right, noblewomen would recline on a special table, and their hairstylists would assemble the wig, vertically stacking curls, ornaments, and powder layer by layer, like building a flamboyant wedding cake upside down. You're not sure whether to be impressed or concerned. The elaborate styles had names too. There was the à la Belle Poule, which featured a ship in full sail commemorating a French naval victory. The à la Circassienne, a kind of wind-swept pastoral look meant to evoke distant Eastern romanticism. And then the à la Sentiment, where women could display personal symbols, lockets, messages, even political allegiances woven right into their hair. Today's fashion, it turns out, is a bit tame in comparison. As you turn a corner, you're ushered into a ballroom where an impromptu gathering is taking place. The wigs here are monumental. One man's hair towers so high it almost touches the chandelier, and the entire room watches nervously as he dances near candlelight. Another noble twirls dramatically, his powdered curls billowing behind him like a frosted cape. And then there's the Duchess of Lancey. Her wig, it's not just tall. It leans forward ever so slightly, like it's about to whisper secrets. Tiny faux birds perch in the branches of a powder-dusted floral arrangement that arcs over her forehead. You wonder whether it's possible to fall in love with someone based on wig architecture alone. But she catches your eye, smiles faintly, and continues floating across the floor, her powdered mountain of hair casting poetic shadows against the candlelit walls. By the time the music fades, you're feeling strangely lightheaded, not from dancing, but from the sheer weight of your own wig. A valet appears silently, offering you a silver flask of lavender water. You nod gratefully and sip. As the room buzzes with conversation and soft flower puffs, you realize something else. The wigs aren't just decorations or symbols. They're conversation starters, like a walking resume. Your hair tells the world who you are, what you believe in, and how long you're willing to sit very still in the name of elegance. And in this court of flower feathers and fantasy, that's everything. Section 7. Your neck is sore now. Not unbearably so, just enough that you start to develop a kind of graceful stoop, a slight tilt to the shoulders that seems to match the way everyone else moves. No one stands entirely upright here, not because they're humble, but because they're carefully balancing entire ecosystems on their heads. You make your way down a quieter gallery, where candlelight flickers off gold moldings, and the faint scent of rosewater clings to the walls. A footman passes carrying a small velvet pouch. You overhear him whisper to another fresh traps. The Duchess saw a tail peeking out. Yes, a tail, because tonight we're entering the uncomfortable, itchy, mildly squeamish world of what lived inside all those powdered wigs. Let's begin with the basics. These things are not exactly breathable. Between the pomade, the flour, the padding, and the layers of stitched-in hair, real or fake, your scalp becomes a cozy, warm, dark place, which to anyone who's ever had to chase a mouse out of a pantry sounds familiar. That's right, wigs attracted more than admirers. They attracted pests. Lice were the main culprits. Persistent, clever, and unfazed by flower lice found these wigs to be luxury condos. They'd burrow into the roots of the powdered curls, lay eggs, and go about their tiny, irritating lives. Historians still argue whether wig hygiene was ever truly effective or just an elaborate denial ritual, a valet mutters, while inspecting a powdered comb under candlelight. But lice weren't the only residents. There are countless diary entries and second-hand accounts of noblemen and women discovering other things. Mice, spiders, beetles. One unlucky baroness woke up to find that a curious field mouse had burrowed into her poof during the night and eaten a clove-scented sachet stitched inside the curls. She fainted. The mouse presumably lived a life of regret. As a result, wigs required constant attention even at night. You pass by a servant's quarters, where rows of wig boxes line the walls. Each is shaped like a tiny coffin, but painted with flowers and gilt patterns. These weren't for travel. They were for sleeping. Nobles would remove their wigs at night and place them inside these boxes, along with herbs like lavender, bay leaves, and wormwood to keep pests at bay. It was like aromatherapy meets pest control. Still, some nobles didn't trust boxes alone. They hired night wig checkers, servants whose sole duty was to peek inside the wig halfway through the night with a candle and a long-handled brush. You can only imagine the job interview for that role. You stop near a fire-lit alcove where an older noblewoman is regaling a cluster of younger ladies with what she calls the rat incident. A distant cousin of hers once leaned in for a kiss and discovered that his beloved's wig was twitching. The courtier nods solemnly. That's why I powder with mint now. You laugh softly to yourself. But then again, when you're wearing several pounds of scented hair bound with animal fat and occasionally studded with fruit or sugar paste for decorative purposes, of course, it's not that surprising. These wigs were like floral buffets for the opportunistic vermin of Versailles, and yet the nobles persisted. They powdered, they posed, they added more. Why? Because no one wanted to be the first to stop. These wigs were more than fashion. They were status. To not wear one, even at the risk of a surprise rodent guest, would be social suicide. You'd be wig-shamed, outflowered, laughed at during breakfast and ignored at the theater. So what did they do? They adapted. Wig pokers became a thing. Delicate silver tools used to scratch one's scalp discreetly beneath the layers. A well-trained noble could shift a curl, reach under, relieve an itch, and reset everything in one fluid motion. It was practically a dance step. A footman passes you, now carrying a tray of such tools: ivory-handled combs, goose feather scratchers, and something that looks like a tiny rake. For light disturbances, he says quietly. Light disturbances, a generous euphemism if ever there was one. You pass through another salon where two ladies are having their wigs refreshed. One has a mirror in hand and is inspecting her powdered curls. "Do you think it looks inhabited?" she whispers. The other leans in, squints, and replies only in the most charming way. They both giggle, and you realize something unexpected. No one here is entirely oblivious to the absurdity. They know. They just lean into it. There's a strange kind of confidence that comes from wearing something so obviously impractical, a sort of powdered defiance. You stop by a window and look out onto the gardens, where moonlight reflects off a row of statues. Even the marble figures seem to be wearing wigs. Maybe it's the angle, or maybe Versailles has powdered everything within reach. You brush a bit of flour from your shoulder and consider your options. You could remove the wig, free your scalp, reclaim your neck, or you could add just a touch more height tomorrow. Maybe a miniature windmill, a sugar-dusted birdcage. The possibilities are endless. You smile. It's official. You've become one of them. Section 8. The morning begins with a trumpet fanfare, a tray of orange-scented tea, and the distinct sensation that your wig has slightly rotated in your sleep. You reach up gently and adjust it back to center a skill you've somehow acquired without instruction. That more than anything tells you you belong here now. Today is a formal affair, a royal audience, the kind of event where even the shadows seem powdered and nobles lean extra far into their wigs for gravitas. The men especially are out in full force, shoulders squared, wigs sculpted, and brows lightly dusted with confidence. That's right, it's time to talk about men in wigs. Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't just women strapping entire bird cages to their heads. The men of the French court were every bit as invested in this follicular theater. It might have been even more crucial for them. A man's wig was a symbol of authority, education, and elegance. Without it, he might as well have been walking around in breeks and shame. You find yourself trailing a cluster of noblemen down a hallway, each with his interpretation of powdered glory. There's the full-bottomed wig cascading past the shoulders in perfectly symmetrical curls. There's the more modest bag wig tied at the back with a bow usually worn by lower-ranking officials or those pretending to be modest. And then there's the ramilies, braided into a queue and powdered within an inch of its life. It's a buffet of powdered pride. You overhear one gentleman remark, "It's not about the length, it's the posture it demands." His friend nods solemnly. A good wig straightens the spine, and it does. You can feel it. The moment that wig goes on, your entire bearing changes. You stand taller, speak slower, gesture more deliberately. It's like wearing dignity as a hat. One mainstream historical fact, often glossed over in the 17th and 18th centuries, wigs were required court dress for men, especially in legal, military, and clerical roles. Judges, ministers, bishops, all powdered. It was part of the uniform, just as essential as a sword or a signet ring. But beyond the regulations, there was a strange sort of camaraderie in it all. A silent agreement that we're all pretending together. That none of us are really this tall or this coiffed or this polished, but we'll pretend because that's what civility demands. You spot a young baron nervously fluffing the sides of his wig before stepping into the king's antechamber. His valet quickly dusts his shoulders and leans in to whisper, left curls listing. A quick adjustment, a dab of extra powder, and he's off. But it wasn't all about nerves and neatness. Some men took it much further. You duck into the gaming room where several nobles are gathered around a card table. The stakes are high. Not just coins, but wig compliments. You hear things like, "Ah, the twist on your temple," "curl masterful," and "your powdering is as even as sunrise." One man whose wig includes miniature scrolls, perhaps representing his law degree, leans back with the swagger of someone who's very sure his flower is fresher than yours. Quirky side note. Men sometimes competed for titles based on their hairstyling alone. There were informal rankings passed along by gossip and discreet notes. Best tapered back. Most symmetrical cue, least noticeable, lice activity. Trophies weren't necessary. The honor was its reward. And lest you think this was limited to France, consider this: powdered wigs were exported culture. English gentlemen, German scholars, and even American colonials. Hello, powdered. George Washington took part in the trend. Versailles just did it, with more chandeliers. Back in the hallway, you come across a row of busts. At first, you think they're marble statues of past dignitaries. Then one of them blinks. Real men, practicing their poses. Apparently in Versailles, how you look while silently contemplating a tapestry is just as important as how you wear your wig. One nobleman tilts his head precisely 13 degrees to the left for ideal profile lighting, he whispers. Historians still argue whether these posture rituals were learned from fencing masters or invented by wig makers. With too much time, another mutters as he readjusts his bow tie. And then disaster. A gust of wind from an open window sends a nobleman's wig slightly askew. It's barely noticeable. Maybe an inch to the left. But in a room like this, it might as well be a full collapse. Servants rush in. Powder is repuffed. Curls are reset. Someone spritzes rose water into the air in a desperate attempt to restore calm. The man, bless him, keeps his composure. He even smiles and bows flour drifting from his shoulders like a cloud of forgiveness. Later that afternoon, you witness a rare ritual, the changing of the wig. Some nobles own dozens. Morning wigs, evening wigs, hunting wigs, reading wigs. There's even a dueling wig, sleek, tied back, meant to stay on during intense swordplay. You imagine the horror of losing one's hair mid-parry. You end the day in a small salon where an elderly count is telling stories. "There was a time I wore a powdered mullet," he says wistfully. "Business in the front, revolution in the back." The room chuckles gently. You sip something warm. You adjust your now slightly flattened wig. And as the evening turns golden, you realize something. Wigs were never just hair. They were performing. Pageantry. A powdered promise that everyone in the room knew their role and was ready to wear it proudly, frizz flower mice and all. Section 9. You awaken the next morning to an odd sort of stillness. The halls of Versailles aren't empty, of course. There's always the distant rustle of skirts, the click of buckled shoes, the low murmur of court gossip being exchanged over early wine. But something feels off, and then it hits you. There's less flour in the air. You peer out the window toward the palace courtyard, where usually a soft haze of powder drifts lazily in the morning sun. Today, nothing. The below are silent. The powder rooms are quiet. You see a valet carding a wig without a puff of flour on it. A chill creeps into your bones. It's the great flour shortage. Yes, this happened, or at least versions of it, rippled through Versailles more than once. As bread prices soared in Paris and the countryside, whispers began to float through the powdered halls. Whispers of discontent, of bakeries raided, of peasants marching. of flour becoming too precious to waste on wigs. And yet, nobles kept dusting. Even now, as you wander the palace halls, you can feel the tension rising like an underbaked souffle. A pair of courtiers huddle in a corner, speaking in hushed tones. They say the farmers are blocking shipments. I had to use cornstarch yesterday. Cornstarch, Philippe, mon Dieu. Did anyone notice? They noticed. You pass a lady in a gown, the color of lemon custard. Her wig slightly limp, powdered with a suspiciously pale blend. Someone coughs, not from illness, from judgment. This is Versailles, after all. Fashion will continue even if the pantry is empty. Still, the contradictions are becoming harder to ignore. You overhear a noble woman muttering, "We dine on cakes while Paris has no bread," as she delicately brushes flour from her shoulder. She doesn't seem to catch the irony. The palace kitchens buzz with concern. Bakers now ration ingredients. Flour once set aside for the noble scalp is being rerouted to actual food. Imagine that. A scandal. Historians still argue whether the court's use of wheat powder directly impacted the bread crisis, says a chef leaning over a steaming pot. But it certainly didn't help. One cook claims a valet tried to bribe her for leftover pastry flour. Another admits nobles are now hoarding personal wig powder supplies in ivory canisters. You imagine a secret drawer filled not with jewels, but with fine white dust, labeled in delicate cursive for temples and crown only. You step into the grand salon where today's gathering feels a bit deflated. Literally. The wigs are smaller. The curls are less crisp. The flour thinner. A few noblemen glance around nervously as if afraid someone will spot the faint sheen of actual hair underneath. The Duchess of Aumale arrives late. Her wig is unpowdered. Gasps. A fan drops. A monocle falls into someone's soup. But then she lifts her chin, looks the room squarely in the eye, and says, "Wheat is for the people." There's a pause. A silence, then applause. Hesitant but real. Revolutionary, perhaps. Or maybe just convenient posturing. Still, the gesture sends ripples through the room. And suddenly it seems like powdered wigs might be teetering on the edge of fashion and history. You overhear a conversation between two older nobles. "Back in my day, we powdered 3 times before breakfast." "Yes, and now look, we're sharing flour with bakers." You think back to your first days here, the clouds of wheat, the absurd heights, the sheer amount of food-grade material used to puff up vanity. And now those same clouds seem almost inappropriate. Still, some cling to tradition. One gentleman passes you wearing a wig dusted with pastry flour, thicker, grainier, and giving him the unfortunate look of someone dipped in batter. A brave effort. But the message is clear. The golden era of powdered wigs may be beginning to crumble like an overbaked croissant. But don't get too excited. Versailles doesn't shift quickly. You wander into a salon where a few nobles are trying alternatives. Chalk powder, crushed rose petals. One has attempted a blend of lavender and white clay. Her wig smells delightful, but is streaked oddly, like marbled fondant. Another young lady whispers to her companion. Mother says she might try talcum. The horror. Powder that doesn't come from bread? What's next? Bare heads. You're ushered into a side room where a nobleman is holding a discreet auction. The items: vintage wig powder tins. Some are still half full. A bidding war erupts over a canister labeled "Milled in Lyon 1775, ideal for bangs." You watch as someone hands over a sapphire ring for a handful of flour tucked inside a silk sachet. A courtier nearby mutters, "We've gone mad." And perhaps they have, because as the wheat disappears from the wigs, something else is bubbling beneath the the surface doubt. Whispers of revolution. Rumors of pamphlets. Even some nobles are beginning to talk of simplicity, a dangerous word in a place built entirely on excess. The powdered wig, once a crown of distinction, is starting to feel like a ghost of its former self. And as yours starts to slump slightly in the growing humidity, you wonder, are you wearing fashion or history's last puff of denial? Section 10. You wake to the sound of snickering. Not the delicate, well-trained kind of laughter Versailles usually produces, but real earthy peasant laughter. It drifts up from somewhere beyond the courtyard, past the hedges, beyond the trimmed symmetry of the gardens. You peek out your window and see a group of kitchen staff gathered near a delivery cart, one of them mimicking a nobleman's posture, complete with an imaginary tower of curls wobbling precariously atop her head. Another throws flour into the air with dramatic flair, as if summoning the spirit of powdered vanity. The rest laugh until they nearly drop the bread loaves they've just finished baking. It's not just snickering anymore. It's a mockery, and it's everywhere. You step into the hall, and suddenly all you can hear between the rustles and fan clicks is the low ripple of satire. Versailles, usually a place of solemn facades and whispered judgments, is beginning to parody itself. You notice the signs first in the portraits. Someone has added a tiny mustache in charcoal to the Duke of Châtillon's painting. Another has taped a caricature over a bust, a powdered wig so tall it pierces a cloud and startles an angel. Historians still argue whether this was the beginning of political resistance or just a particularly bold prank, a steward murmurs while gently brushing the flour off a suit of armor. But it doesn't stop at chalk doodles. The pamphlets begin to circulate, necks slipped under doorways left on velvet benches hidden beneath silver trays. They're small, crudely drawn and printed on coarse paper, but they're devastating. One shows a nobleman trying to enter a bakery only to be refused because his wig is the bread. Another depicts a woman using her husband's powdered wig to season soup. And the captions, cheeky biting, effective. They eat powder while we eat nothing. Let them wear wheat. Our hunger is their fashion. The satire cuts deep. For the first time, you see courtiers glance self-consciously at one another's hair. One noble carefully adjusts her curls with fingers that tremble ever so slightly. Another shrink behind a column, trying to shake flour from his cuffs before anyone notices. You enter the salon and the conversation is subdued. Not because anyone's stopped talking, but because the topic is shifting. They're whispering about outside voices, about the people, about hunger. It's the first time you've heard that word spoken above a mutter. It's also the first time you've seen a noble intentionally depowdered. He's standing by the fireplace, a young marquis. His wig is still sculpted, still curled, but there's no powder, no wheat dust, no scent of rosewater or cinnamon. It's just hair, and it's shocking. You watch as eyes turn toward him, some curious, others scandalized. One older nobleman lets out a strangled cough, but no one says a word. Not yet. You follow the marquis out into the corridor, where he's quickly joined by two others similarly flour-free. They speak in low tones. It's about perception, I know. I don't want to be the last one powdered, or the first one guillotined. You shiver, because that's the truth hiding behind the jokes. Powdered wigs are no longer just ridiculous, they're dangerous. Symbols of disconnect, of arrogance, of apathy. Still, many refuse to let go. In the dining hall, the Duchess of Saint-Maur appears, defiantly powdered head to toe. Her curls shimmer under a fresh coat of wheat flour, and she trails a wake of powder across the parquet floor like a chalk comet. She smiles serenely, as if to say, I regret nothing. But you notice how few people sit near her. You notice how the servant sweeping up behind her isn't even pretending to be subtle. He sighs, loudly. Elsewhere in the palace, the parodies continue. A group of servants stage a secret performance. Le Théâtre de la Perte de Farine, a shadow play featuring a giant powdered wig toppling off a nobleman's head and crushing an entire bakery. The nobles in attendance laugh politely, but their smiles are tight. Another pamphlet appears the next morning. This one shows a peasant woman offering a wig-wearing aristocrat a slice of bread only for the noble to turn up his nose and say, "No thanks, I'm already wearing mine." You chuckle despite yourself. Then you look around. No one else is laughing. The humor is no longer gentle. It's a tool, a wedge, a whisper of revolution dressed as a joke. You pass a valet dusting flour off a windowsill with particular intensity. He doesn't look up. "Used to be proud of this job," he mutters. "Now I'm cleaning up food for fashion." And as you step into the hallway, your powdered wig beginning to feel heavier. By the second, you wonder, is the powder beginning to crack? Maybe. But one thing's certain, people are watching now. And the joke, it's on the one still laughing. Section 11. You've always known Versailles was a performance. Every powdered curl, every silken hem, every delicately timed glance. It's all part of the show. But tonight, the curtain lifts in an entirely new way. There's a ripple of anticipation in the halls, a buzz sharper than usual. Courtiers gather not around the wine trays or card tables, but near the grand staircase. The queen is about to appear, and not just any queen, Marie Antoinette. You adjust your wig lighter today, perhaps unconsciously, and find a spot near the back. The footmen straighten, the whispers hush. Then at the top of the staircase she emerges, and you freeze. Her wig is a ship, an actual 3-foot replica of a French naval vessel, complete with rigging sails and tiny flags. You half expect it to honk and reverse into the crowd, This is the famous coiffure à la belle poule, styled in 1778 after a French naval victory. The ship on her head is the belle poule itself, now immortalized not in a painting but in pomade and flour. It's magnificent, it's ridiculous, it's Versailles. The queen descends the stairs slowly, the ship gently rocking with each step, like it's floating on a calm sea of gossip and rosewater. Her attendants flank her, each carrying additional powder puffs and emergency stabilizers, thin rods hidden beneath her sleeves to support the mast should turbulence arise. You think about how long it must have taken. Hours, surely. Perhaps more. Wig makers laboring like naval engineers. Florists weaving tiny silk waves. Powder flung in careful arcs like sea foam. This isn't just fashion, it's naval propaganda. And a dare. Historians still argue whether the Bella Pula wig was her idea or her hairdresser's, someone whispers beside you. Does it matter? The result is the same. She's made herself a floating symbol, a towering act of patriotism, a walking pun, a queen with fleet power. The crowd is stunned. Some are dazzled. Others, not so much. Because while the queen sails across the ballroom, like a powdered admiral murmurs, "Rise beneath the surface." Not everyone finds her fashion statements charming anymore. They say she spent more on that wig than on school books for an entire village, a woman mutters into her fan. Another replies, "At least it's wheat. Could have been sugar." You catch snippets like this all evening. Not that the queen notices. Or perhaps she pretends not to. She laughs gently, spins just enough to show off her starboard side. A few nobles cheer. Others clap cautiously, their wigs now feeling like dinghies beside her royal frigate. But the symbolism isn't lost on anyone. Marie Antoinette's wig is many things, a marvel, a message, a metaphor. It's a crown and a lightning rod, And for some, it's the final straw in a loaf already stretched thin. You follow her through the ballroom as she makes her rounds. Her hair sways with purpose. Servants duck beneath the sails. A small boy nearly walks headfirst into the bowsprit, and then disaster. A chandelier hung slightly lower than usual catches the tip of the main mast. There's a thunk, a collective inhale. The queen freezes. A courtier lunges forward. The mast tilts. A tiny silk flag flutters to the floor. No one moves. And then, miraculously, the mast rights itself. A discreet snap of wire, a puff of fresh powder, the ship sails on. The court exhales as one. You retreat to a quieter corner of the room, where two wig stylists sit in the shadows sipping cooled tea and observing their handiwork. Too top-heavy, one says. Brilliant balance, the other replies. The powder hid the crack. They both nod like battlefield surgeons. Later that night in the Queen's chambers, you overhear her ladies-in-waiting discussing tomorrow's style options. A garden scene, a hot air balloon. One suggests a replica of Versailles itself. The Queen laughs, but it's a tired laugh. Maybe she knows the storm is coming, because outside the gates things are different now. The peasants don't see a ship. They see wheat, food, a floating insult. You wander back through the palace, your wig tilted just slightly, your feet sore, your mind spinning. Marie Antoinette's ship has made its mark. It sailed across the ballroom, across history, straight into satire and ultimately into revolution. The flower still clings to the air, soft and sweet, but it's beginning to feel combustible. Section 12. The morning after the shipwreck incident, the air in Versailles feels noticeably thicker. Not just with powder, but with something else. A shift. The kind of quiet tension that settles before a summer storm. You pass a servant in the corridor sweeping flour off the banisters with the precision of someone performing a farewell ritual. He pauses, glances at your wig, then at the faint white trail you're leaving behind. He doesn't smile. In the salons, nobles speak in lower tones. Wigs are still worn, of course. This is Versailles. But they're shorter now, less elaborate. The flower is applied sparingly, as though a heavy hand might invite not admiration but accusation, because the court's favorite fashion accessory has become a symbol. And symbols are dangerous things. You overhear a whisper in the music room. The markets are empty, yet the marquis still powders twice a day. They say there's flour hidden in the chapel crypts. It would be funny if it weren't so very real. Outside the palace, France is changing. Bread lines stretch longer. Coin purses grow lighter. Pamphlets flow like underground rivers, carrying satire, criticism, and calls to rise. But inside, the powder persists. Only now it's regulated. That's right, Versailles has created rules for wig powder. You step into the chamber of etiquette, a grand name for what is essentially a series of well-upholstered meetings, and discover that powder usage has officially been codified. There's a limit on how much may be used per head. Specific flour blends have been restricted to certain hours of the day. Powdering must occur only in designated salons. Unauthorized puffing grounds for demotion. For you blink. But it makes sense. The court is desperate to control the message, to preserve appearances both literal and metaphorical. If the nobles can't stop wearing wigs, they can at least pretend to powder responsibly. A steward explains the logic. We must show the people we care. So we use less flour, but more ceremony. It's peak Versailles logic. There are now schedules for powdering rotations that stagger who gets puffed and when. This way, if peasants are watching from the gates, and they won't see everyone powdered at once. Flour, after all, has become political. You peek into a powder salon, formerly a bustling space of clouds and elegance. Now it's like a powder ration line. Courtiers sit in assigned chairs, waiting silently, as valets measure out pre-approved puffs. One nobleman protests, "This isn't enough to coat my left curl." The powder master responds without looking up. "Then trim the curl." A collective gasp. You step back into the corridor and find two women debating flour. Alternatives: rice starch, talc chalk dust. One swears by crushed eggshells. Another claims almond flour works, but attracts bees. You imagine a wig full of bees, decide not to dwell on it. Quirky fact. Some nobles begin sneaking extra flour in sachets sewn into their sleeves like smugglers. One baron is caught with a pouch of fine milled wheat tucked inside a snuff box. He's reprimanded, quietly. The flour is confiscated and repurposed for the king's ceremonial wig. And what a wig it is. You attend a reception that evening, and Louis XVI enters wearing a newly styled masterpiece short, neat and dusted with symbolic flour. That's what they call it now. Symbolic flour. As if calling it that makes it less edible. It doesn't, but appearances are everything. The king's wig is meant to reassure. To say, "See, we're just like you," except taller and with better curl definition. A courtier whispers its powdered humility. You nod, but you feel it too. That creeping sense that everything here is a theater. The flour, the wigs, the etiquette, it's all a stage carefully designed to pretend the world outside isn't on fire. But the actors are starting to fumble their lines. In the Queen's salon, Marie Antoinette has traded her ship wig for something simpler. A modest bun, lightly dusted. But no one compliments her. Not because it isn't lovely, but because they're not sure what the rules are anymore. Is less flour good, or does it imply fear? Is a simple wig humble or defiant? Historians still argue whether the Queen's quieter styles were genuine efforts at reform or just rebranding murmurs a tutor in the corner. And honestly, no one knows. You wander the palace as the sun sets golden light, hitting powdered curls and stained glass windows. You pass nobles rehearsing their expressions, adjusting their wigs, smoothing flour from their lapels. And you think this is Versailles, trying to hold itself together with ribbons, rituals, and finely sifted denial. But the flour is running low, and so is time. Section 13. The rain comes softly at first light, steady, and too gentle to disturb the powdered gardens of Versailles. But then the clouds darken, and thunder follows. You watch from an upper gallery as the storm rolls in a sheet of gray, swallowing the horizon like a curtain drawing across the stage. Inside the palace, everything proceeds as if nothing is happening. But something is happening. The guards at the gates are doubled. Carriages arrive with less frequency. Letters are delivered in thicker envelopes, sealed not with wax, but with fear. And still the wigs are worn. Today, though, the flour is absent entirely. Not reduced, not rationed, gone. Even the king's attendants have foregone their little puffers. The queen, when she passes by, wears her hair naturally curled and unadorned. She looks younger, almost human. You descend to the hall of mirrors where a crowd has gathered. But it isn't a ball. It's something quieter, tenser. Word has spread, some say the Bastille has fallen. Others whisper that Paris has risen. A few shake their heads and mutter, "It's just another rumor," but they don't sound convinced. You spot a courtier brushing his wig clean, not to style it, but to remove the last traces of flour. He finishes and quietly places the wig in a chest. A moment later, another noble does the same. No one says anything. They just watch as one by one, the powdered monuments of the old order are tucked away like relics. It's not a revolution, it's a retreat. Outside, the storm worsens. Servants close the windows. Paintings tremble slightly on the walls. The candle flames lean with every gust. You make your way through the palace and notice something astonishing. The air smells different. It smells like lavender, yes, and candle wax, but no longer like bread. For the first time in weeks, there's no flour in your lungs, no fine dust coating your skin. The powdered air has cleared, and in its place there's silence. A noblewoman nearby pulls the pins from her curls. They fall softly, revealing her natural hair, fine, silvering human. She catches your eye and says it feels lighter. And you realize she doesn't mean the wig. You continue to the chapel, where even the bishop now stands wigless. His bald head gleams in the candlelight, and no one dares laugh. His voice is quiet, but his presence is firm. We were born with nothing on our heads, he says. And perhaps we should die that way too. The court doesn't argue. Instead, they begin to prepare. Wigs are folded, packed, and hidden. Some are burned. Yes, burned. You follow a group of young nobles to the palace kitchens, where a small fire has been lit in the old bread oven. One by one, they toss in their wigs. The flames devour the pomade. The flour sizzles, the curls blacken and curl like paper. Historians still argue whether the wig burnings were symbolic acts of solidarity or just panic, someone mutters as he tosses in his coiffed crown. You stand there holding yours. It's absurd. Just goat hair and starch. A thing of fashion, of status. But somehow it weighs more than it should. You place it in the fire, watch it vanish, and with it something else disappears too. Something unspoken. A version of yourself that bowed and powdered and tilted your head just so. That waited for approval. That played the part. You're not the only one who feels it. All around you, nobles begin to change. Not their clothes, not yet, but their posture. They stand straighter, walk slower, speak less. It's as if without the wigs, they're not sure who they are anymore. In the Hall of Mirrors, a woman laughs. Not a courtly titter, a real laugh, loud, honest. Heads turn. Then a few more join in. Nervous at first, then real. It's contagious. You catch yourself smiling even as thunder rumbles outside. The wigs are gone, and suddenly you can hear each other again. You leave the kitchens and step into the garden where rain has begun to wash away the powdered footprints that once lined the marble paths. No more flour, no more pretending. Only wet cobblestones, pale dawn, and the scent of something new. Section 14. The days that follow are a blur of adjustment. Without wigs, Versailles feels exposed. The high walls no longer echo with flowery laughter, and the salons sit quieter, less like theaters, more like waiting rooms. Nobles wander the halls bareheaded, uncertain of how to carry themselves without several pounds of pomade and political symbolism balanced above their brows. You wake up one morning and realize the powder rooms have been repurposed. The great bellows, once instruments of aesthetic excess, now sit unused beside crates of linens and jars of dried herbs. One footman tells you with a half smile, "We're storing real food here now. Lentils and barley." You nod. It feels strangely revolutionary. Court life, stripped of its flowery facade, begins to reorganize itself. The elaborate wig hierarchies fade. The gossip once centered on curls and curls placement turns instead to whispered questions. Where will the king go? What does it mean if the queen still hosts garden parties? In the evenings, you stroll the quieter gardens. The air is clearer, washed clean by rain and change. You pass a group of young nobles reading Rousseau aloud beneath a cedar tree. One of them is barefoot. His hair is unpowdered, wind-tossed. He looks free. A few steps away, a woman once known for her shipwig sketches in a journal. When you glance over, you see she's drawing a tree. Not a hairstyle inspired by a tree, a real tree. roots and all. Feels strange, doesn't it? She says. All this air above our heads. You smile, lighter. The palace staff, too, seems transformed. Without the endless demands of powder preparation, they walk more easily. Some even hum again. The servants who once handled wigs now clean quills, prepare travel trunks, and sharpen knives. You hear one footman say, "I used to carry flour. Now I carry maps." Change is infectious. One evening, as the sun melts across the west facade of the palace, you find yourself standing beside the grand reflecting pool. Once this space would have been filled with glittering silhouettes, powdered heads, haloed in gold voices floating like music over water. Now it's just you, a breeze. In your hair real untamed, a bit stubborn. You sit on a bench and think back to the flower, the below, the tiny bird cages balanced with such absurd precision. You remember the ceremony of it all, the tiny flower puffs that turned heads into clouds, the smell of lavender mixed with lard, the quiet horror of discovering a tail, or worse, a nibble in a royal coiffure. You remember the way people stared at each other's wigs like they were diplomatic statements. And they were. Each curl, each powder choice, each height, it all said something. I belong. I matter. I see you seeing me. Without the wigs, everything feels quieter, but somehow more true. One quirky fact floats back to you, a rumor really, that some nobles in the early days of wig fashion were so insecure without their powdered armor, they'd sleep in their wigs. They'd have a servant gently adjust the angle of their heads so the shape would remain intact by morning. Historians still argue whether this was vanity or vulnerability. You suspect both. And now that those wigs are gone, burned, buried, boxed away, you see the people beneath them. The duke with the shaking hands, the baroness with the secret smile, the footman who always knew when to speak and when to disappear. You rise and begin to walk back through the palace, past powderless portraits, past hairbrushes that now gather dust, past mirrors that reflect unfiltered faces. In one of the smaller salons, a group gathers not to talk of fashion or flower, but to discuss news from Paris. There's tension, yes, but also curiosity, caution wrapped in courage. You sit beside them, no longer feeling like a spectator. You're one of them now, not because of your title, not because of your curls, but because you are undisguised. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is the point. Section 15. Twilight seeps into the palace like ink across parchment, and Versailles begins to exhale. Servants light the last candles. The scent of beeswax replaces the old perfume of flower. Even the shadows seem less theatrical now, more grounded. You pass through the halls slowly, your footsteps quiet against the marble. The echo is different now, less muffled. No clouds of powder floating in the air. No rustle of taffeta brushing past flower-laden wigs. Just the sound of people being people. In the grand salon, a harpist plays something gentle and low. Around her, nobles sit in a loose circle. No one performs. No one competes. Some don't even speak. They simply listen, nod, sip warm wine from heavy goblets. One woman's hair is pinned back with a simple ribbon. Another man, once famous for wearing 3 feet of curls to breakfast, now wears none. No one seems to care. You lower yourself into a seat by the window and look out over the gardens. For the first time since you arrived, the hedges look a little wild. Nature is reclaiming its edges. The statues wear soft moss at their feet, and your head, it feels bare, honest, lighter than it has been in weeks. You think back to what it meant to live beneath that powdered cloud. The days of bowing beneath chandeliers, measuring status by curl and flower, smiling with one eye on the nearest wig puffer. The constant posture. The quiet panic when the powder smudged or the curls sagged. and you wonder, did anyone ever actually like it? Or did they all just wait for someone else to go first? Quirky as it sounds, there's an old tale of a nobleman who once tried to stage a wig-free salon, invited friends, wore his hair, offered bread instead of cake. Only one guest showed up, his valet. Historians still argue whether it happened at all or whether it was just a fable told by exhausted wig makers who dreamed of early retirement. Still, the point remains. Sometimes to change a world built on flower and performance, someone has to walk in with nothing on their head but truth. A voice nearby calls softly, "They've opened the gates. You turn." The palace gates, those great gilded barriers separating Versailles from the world, have been unlatched. Not thrown open, just loosened. A symbolic gesture, a quiet beginning. Some nobles drift toward them curious. Not fleeing, not abandoning, just approaching, as if drawn by something beyond powdered tradition and mirrored ceilings. You join them. At the threshold, you turn back one last time. Versailles stands still, beautiful, still proud, but not untouched. The powder's gone. The wigs are burned or buried. The old symbols once lifted high on sculpted scalps have returned to the earth. And what remains? People, tired, humbled, uncertain, but real. You step through the gate. The sky overhead is a tapestry of stars, no longer dimmed by dust. You take a breath, and for the first time since you arrived, the air tastes like nothing. Just a night, just newness, just now. And now, as the powdered halls of Versailles fade into memory, let yourself drift further into softness. No more flour, no more pins, no more balancing acts. Just you. Let the echo of those ancient footsteps dissolve into quiet. Let the last harp note linger in your mind like a feather in the dark. The wigs are gone. The chandeliers have dimmed. Even the gardens, once sculpted to perfection, now rest under a blanket of dew. You're no longer walking through history. You're floating above it, light, effortless, steady. Feel the weight of all those curls, ornaments, ribbons, and rituals gently lift from your shoulders. No need to keep posture anymore. You can soften. You can exhale. The palace behind you becomes a silhouette. A powdered dream receding slowly into the mist of sleep. Let your breath grow slower now. Let the images blur: a ship in a wig, a whisper in a mirror. A quiet act of defiance as flour falls into flame. Let them go. You're safe. You're warm. You're already halfway between yesterday and tomorrow. No more performances. No more powdered expectations. Only stillness. Only stars. Only sleep. Sweet dreams.